Rule number 1, go for it. I don't take a walk before you run approach to anything. It's my experience that success belongs to aggressive people, the ones who are willing to take risks and go for it. Before you make any plans for your future, check your personal supply of persistence, determination, and ambition. They're better indicators of success than anything else you have. Right out of high school, I decided to go for it, jumping into a place where everyone said I didn't belong. I wanted to play Division I basketball at American University in Washington, D.C. Everyone thought I should sign with any one of the Division II schools recruiting me and consider myself lucky. After all, they reminded me, but that's not what I wanted, so I made a deal with the coach from American University. If I went out for the team and made it, he'd get me a scholarship. Feeling pretty proud of my brilliant plan, I headed off to American University. Right after I registered for classes, that coach left the school without telling anybody about our deal. Now I had to wrangle the same agreement with the new coach. If I remember correctly, Fat Chance was the only encouragement I heard from my family and friends. The other guys at the tryout were big, 7 feet, 6'10", 6'6", and all African American. It didn't look good for this scrawny little white kid. Once you announce you're going for it, friends and colleagues will all have a lot to say. You can't do that. You'll get eaten up alive. You're in way over your head. I've learned to use these discouraging words as a source of motivation. When people try to bring you down, knock you down, you've got to work harder to prove them wrong. The big decision. I proved them all wrong. Sort of. I made the team, but I didn't get my scholarship. But as it turned out, that was okay, because when I was on the team, I made a friend who would eventually turn my life around. Russell Boo Bowers, the leading scorer in the country, was on the American University team. There wasn't a basketball fan who didn't know Bowers' name. He was fantastic, but he had a problem. Sports agents from around the country were all over him, at the gym, at his dorm, at lunch, after his classes. He couldn't move a muscle without having an agent in his face. Finally, the heavy recruiting started to affect his concentration and his game, and the coach went nuts. He ordered all agents off campus. Word got out fast that no one was allowed to recruit Bowers during the season. This situation was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. If you're going to be successful, you have to know what opportunity looks like when it's staring you in the face. I practiced with this guy every day. We traveled together all over the country. I lived in the dorm room next to his. Who knew Boo Bowers better than I did? And who had the exclusive access to him? I decided I wanted to be his agent. Why not? The fact that I knew nothing at all about managing an athlete didn't make me crazy, as many claimed. It made me determined to find out more. I knew being an agent had something to do with signing contracts, so I called a friend who was a lawyer. I knew Roy Greenman, who had been my camp counselor years before. Wouldn't laugh at the idea. Roy introduced me to his friend and partner, Arnie Budden. They helped me form a company, and at the age of 19, I signed Bowers as my first client. Jumping into a situation where I had no experience may seem risky, but this approach to life is the foundation of my success. The first rule of this book is to go for it, because it is the first rule I live by. The opportunity was there. It wasn't going to come again. I had to grab onto it and go for the ride. What you lack in experience, make up for in an overload of motivation, dedication, and ambition. A risky step. Now I had dollar signs in my eyes. I wanted to be a great sports agent and become disgustingly wealthy. In my sophomore year of college, I had an economics professor who claimed he knew the process and method of becoming a millionaire. He had my full attention. I listened hard. I really wanted to learn, but something about his plan just didn't seem right. How did he know if these strategies and methods really worked? Had he tried them out? Did real life actually work like the textbooks describe? I decided to follow this professor after class one day to learn more about him. I found out that this highly credentialed academically astute guy who claimed to know the secrets of wealth and fortune was driving a 12-year-old rusty heap without hubcaps or a muffler. Something seemed to have gone wrong in his formula for wealth. I followed him as he drove off spitting and spurting black exhaust fumes. He pulled up to a decrepit apartment house in a rundown neighborhood. This guy was going to teach me how to be a millionaire? I don't think so. Before you accept any information as fact, evaluate the source. Ask yourself, has this person been there? What has he or she accomplished? I decided I couldn't take another 2.5 years of getting secondhand information that couldn't be applied in the real world. This time going for it meant leaving school. I wanted to be an entrepreneur, a self-employed businessman, a participant in the American dream. I thought these were admirable goals. My parents disagreed. They were furious that I was giving up my education, my future. At best, they hoped I was just going through a phase that would pass. So to keep the peace, I agreed to compromise. I would take a leave of absence rather than quit outright. They were sure I'd be back. I was positive I wouldn't. My parents figured the deck was stacked in their favor. With a little real-world shock therapy, they were sure I'd be back the next semester. They threw me out of the house, they took back the car, they stopped all funding and allowances, they sat back and waited for me to come home begging to return to school. But for somebody like me, this was a challenge, not a setback. I was even more determined to stay out of school and be successful. Having to sacrifice personal comforts made me feel more of an urgency to make it to the top faster. If they hadn't starved me, what would be the hurry? When you go for it, you'll probably have to sacrifice something you have now, maybe security, maybe income, maybe status. This fact will push you in one of two ways. One, you'll either be so nervous about this loss that you won't be able to get anything done. Or two, you'll be so determined to make up for the loss that nothing will stop you. There's no place in the middle. You have to pick a side. I moved into an attic in Summit, New Jersey with a roommate. It sounded impressive to say I was a sports agent, but at that point my profession wasn't paying the bills. So my first move was to get a job that could support my career. I started commuting into New York to work on Wall Street on the commodities floor. Even though this wasn't what I wanted to do forever, this was a great job for two reasons. First, this is the place to meet a lot of big investors who don't know what to do with all their money. I knew I need this information down the line. Second, work was over at 2:30 in the afternoon every day. This gave me time to build up my real business as a sports agent. Jumping into business, ready or not. I signed a few more basketball players. I signed a baseball umpire. Then a local paper wrote an article about my agency. This little article opened up another door that people warned me to stay away from. So of course, I just had to run through it. I got a call from a guy named Sarge Esposito, who saw the article. "How'd you like to manage some fighters?" he asked. It flashed through my mind that I didn't know one thing about fighters, but I did know I would be willing to manage a snail at that point. "Sounds good," I said. "How can we get started?" We met at a gym in Plainfield, New Jersey, where there were a bunch of muscle-bound guys about my age working out. "Which ones are the toughest kids in here?" I asked. Esposito pointed out 3 strong, fast fighters. "I'll take all 3, I said. "Why pick one? I figured if all 3 were available." I soon learned why I should have only taken one. The trainer sat me down and mapped out all the stuff he and his fighters needed. We need salaries we can live on. We need food money, training money, and spending money so the fighters can concentrate on training and winning. I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I figured if I had about 25 grand, I could make it work. I went back to the lawyers and they assured me that they didn't have 25,000, but they said I could start a limited partnership to raise the money. I didn't know what the hell they were talking about, but I always believe that when something sounds too complicated, all I have to do is break it down to its simplest form so I can work with it. What they were trying to tell me was that I could get all the money by asking lots of people for some of the money. What I really needed was only $2,500 from 10 different people. This was doable. Over the next few months, I begged hundreds of people for the money, and soon I had the 10 people I needed. I signed my first 3 fighters and set out to get them fights. I quickly learned that this is not easy to do when you don't know anybody in the business. I called all over the country looking for someone to fight these guys. I couldn't get them a fight in the back alley behind a bar, nothing. Then finally, I got a fight from my number one guy with a fight promoter named Vito Tolorito in Hartford, Connecticut. With my buddies along for support, we drove up there for this pro debut in a packed house with a bunch of good fights. My guy got in the ring against a local Hartford fighter, and right off the bat, my fighter was beating the heck out of this other guy, beating him from post to post, killing him. At the end of the 4-round fight, we were cheering and celebrating and congratulating all over the place. Then came the official decision. My fighter lost the fight. I had my first big common sense learning experience in boxing. It is always preferential to seek a neutral location for a fight. Okay, so now that I had lost this little piece of insider info, how could I use it to work for me instead of against me? The answer was obvious. Before I even got back home that night, I had decided to promote a fight in my fighter's hometown in Plainfield, New Jersey. I wanted to fight all 3 of my guys in a big blowout boxing event, but nobody had promoted a fight in Plainfield or anywhere near the area in more than 20 years. All the fights were going to Atlantic City back then. And the boxing commissioner said I needed a license to promote a fight. No problem. I figured I'd get a license. I called Bob Lee, who is now the head of the International Boxing Federation, but who was then the state athletic commissioner. I told him my name, and he asked how old I was. I told him, and he laughed. He asked if I had ever been involved in boxing, and I said no. He asked if I had ever laced a pair of gloves before, and I said no. He asked if I knew anything about boxing, and I said no. He asked if I had a friend or anybody who could teach me, and I said no. Mr. Lee, not really at all. He drew in a deep breath and then barked at me. Are you crazy? I'm going to give you the best advice you're ever going to get. After you hang up this phone, turn away from boxing and run as fast as you can away from this sport. Believe me, you'll lose your shirt. This is a cutthroat business that will chew up and spit out a guy like you. I said, well, thanks for the advice, and I hung up. This obviously was just one more time that I would have to ignore a knowledgeable person and go for it anyway. When people tell you you're crazy, it's a good sign that you're on the right track. When your competitors tell you you're no good and you're a failure, that means you're onto something big. Learning the ropes. I found someone who did have a license. I made him my co-promoter and legally promoted my fight. Now my real education began. I was about to venture into an area of sports promoting that no classroom course could have prepared me for, no book could have explained, and where no timid person should ever venture. For the next 3 months, I did everything. First, I sold my car to get the $10,000 I guessed it would take to put on a fight. Then, I quit my job because it was taking up too much of my time. I got a good job selling computer supplies on my own clock. I spent every spare minute working to put this fight together, many times until 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. in the morning. I did everything from ordering the tickets and making posters to arranging hotel rooms for the fighters, filing contracts, and setting up chairs. I did everything. Once you decide to go for it, you've got to stay focused. You've got to eat, breathe, and sleep whatever it is you're doing. There's no doubt that I've learned a lot from sports promoting from this experience, but I also learned that sometimes no matter how hard you work, it's dumb luck that really makes the difference. The day before the fight, I had almost 0 tickets sold. I was dying because I had invested so much time and money. You can bet I started to doubt the wisdom of jumping in blind and following the go-for-it philosophy. But then, the day of the fight, people just kept coming and coming and coming. The place was sold out. People were practically climbing in through the air vents. I was a genius. Well, actually, I was lucky. That was the day I learned an important lesson about staging an event. Know your crowd. Know what's going on in their lives on the date of your event. In this case, I just happened to pick the day for the fight when the residents of this inner city got their welfare checks. The day when they had money in hand to spend. Without knowing it, I had used a brilliant piece of marketing strategy. Although I think it was a miracle that the whole thing came out at all, it turned out to be a great night. The crowd had a wild time. They loved it. I had invited a bunch of heavy-hitting investors who I hoped would help me in the future. It was a good time, really perfect. especially because all of my guys won. To this day, I don't know how it happened. I was working with nothing more than common sense and a willingness to go for what I wanted with a whole lot of enthusiasm and energy. If you decide to go for it, at some point there will be risk involved. Eventually, you'll find yourself flying without a net, but that's what makes it so exciting and worthwhile. If you want to be an entrepreneur in any profession, you have to be able to live with risk because you can't get ahead of everybody else without sticking your neck out. Graduation. Over the next year, I put together 2 more fights just like that one. Each one was better than the last. These fights were my graduation into sports management. I had taken the course in the school of hard knocks, paid some dues, and was ready to launch my career. I had learned more in those 3 fights than I could ever have learned in my 4 years of college. I still wasn't making any money, but I was in heaven. And most important, I had proven that I wasn't a loser because I had dropped out of college. This experience also taught me a very valuable lesson. When you have the guts to take a giant step towards something you really want, the people around you aren't going to cheer you on. You're doing something that they're scared to do, and whether it's out of good intentions or out of jealousy, they're going to root against you. Maybe it's human nature. Whatever the reason for the put-downs, you have to get past them. If you want to go for something very important in your life, accept criticism as normal and keep moving forward. Never look back. Critical life lessons. Don't always walk before you run. Use discouraging comments such as, "You'll get eaten alive," to fuel your determination. Be open to opportunity. Don't let a lack of experience slow you down. Make up for it with excess motivation, determination, persistence, and ambition. Don't be afraid of sacrifice. It's a great motivator. Be critical of experts who tell you how it's done unless they've already done it. When people tell you you're crazy, it's a good sign that you're on the right track. Eat, breathe, and sleep your goals. Risk is good. You can't get ahead of everybody else unless you're willing to stick your neck out. Go for it and don't look back.